Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Laurie Knape with Avetta. Today we're going to talk about integrated management systems and the framework on how to create one. I hope you will find the information provided useful. We're going to look at risks, what is an integrated management system, fundamentals of an integrated management system, framework for an integrated management system, and I'm going to provide you with a few charts and graphs for guidance tools. So the first thing we're going to talk about is risks, risk tolerances, and compliance systems. So where is your risk dial, and why is that important? Workers are not the only one that have a risk tolerance. Organizations do as well. A worker's risk tolerance can be based on your prior experiences both on and off the job. Personal hobbies such as hunting, deep sea fishing, and rock climbing. Their experiences or hobbies could dampen their risk perception. What might seem risky to me is normal to them, but it doesn't make it correct. It doesn't make taking risks okay. Organizations have a risk assessment as well. There are three prime types of risk: risk appetite, risk tolerance, and residual risk. Per ISO 31000, a risk appetite is defined as the amount and type of risk that an organization is prepared to pursue, retain, or take, meaning that some organizations will assume the risk of others. A risk tolerance is the acceptable level of risk-based objectives. A low risk tolerance would mean the organization would make more cautious and conservative business decisions that do not subject the organization to a high level of threat. A high risk tolerance would be more aggressive business objectives that have a higher likelihood of high level consequences and more consequences, not only higher level, but additional consequences. This is kind of similar to the stock market. If you invest in high-risk stocks, you can make a lot of money. However, when the stock market isn't running so well, you could lose a lot of money. When you're going with a lower risk stock, you won't make as much money, but when the stock market's on a downturn, you won't lose as much. When deciding what type of risk taker you or your organization chooses to be, you must consider the residual risk factor. Simply stated, residual risk is the remaining risk after mitigation controls are in place. For an example, you identify your risk, you put your risk controls in place, but they're not able to completely eliminate the risk. There is some level of risk remaining. If that residual risk is below the organization's acceptable risk tolerance, no further action is needed. If the level of risk is above the acceptable risk tolerance, you will need to reassess the risk and identify additional or alternative mitigation strategies. If the cost of the strategies is greater than the impact of the risk, the organization needs to decide if they are willing to accept that high risk. So here is a classic example of how an organization can be tricked into thinking that they are meeting all the requirements that they need. They've created a gap analysis, but they have not taken into consideration how this analysis will affect other management systems. One component of their organization might have a go level, but when linked to other components, it might have a no-go level. So this picture is great. We all have the parts. We check the boxes. We must have an effective management system. Clearly, this illustration supports the previous slides. All the parts are here, but it is not an effective system. With this one, the presence of the individual parts isn't enough. They must be properly connected because they are interdependent, which is the definition of an integrated management system. The integrated management system of an organization is vital to the long-term success of the organization. So we're going to look into IMS. So here's a quotation that is entertaining. And if you're a math person, you may find this entertaining. This is a sample equation for an IMS. All integrated management system parts must align with all of the organization's management systems. There are no silos. Everything has to add up and equal your integrated management system. So what is an IMS? The definition is a single management system managing multiple aspects of organizational performance to meet the requirements of more than one management standard. So what that means, this classic definition, is that your IMS is an overarching process to ensure that all systems are identified, established, implemented, maintained, and improved. The IMS has interacting elements that are designed to establish and achieve similar performance goals. The system integrates multiple standards from different disciplines across the organization into one. So this pinwheel, so here is what an IMS can look like. An integrated management system joins all the organization's systems and processes into one complete framework, enabling the organization to work as a single unit but with joined performance objectives. Here are some examples of different management systems your organization may require, depending upon your scope of work. As you know, ISO has standards that are universal and other standards that are specific to industry, such as transportation or aerospace. There's a lot of ISO standards referenced on this pinwheel. That's why I wanted to mention ISO. If you have not explored the ISO website, I highly recommend that you do. They produce a list each year of standards that have been audited or have been amended or reviewed. It's a good tool to use when auditing your own IMS system to make sure that their findings in their audits replicate or at least address some of the findings in your audits, and again, to make sure that what ISO is certifying mostly that you're addressing as well. So this pinwheel is essentially the same thing. However, if you're a smaller company where you may not have many formal departments, then you may not think about all of those different standards that you have to have as in the other pinwheel. So this one here I wanted to provide for you to give you a visual of the different types of risk that you could have within your company. Just like everything, if it's not jotted down, you don't remember it. That's why you have to keep diaries of things, whether it's a food diary or a money diary or whatever it is. Sometimes, unfortunately, we get so busy in our lives that if we don't have a written record of things, it can definitely slip between the cracks. So these are just some little visual images that I pulled together that mimic the other pinwheel for if you are a smaller company without those dedicated departments. This will give you some guidance as to what you may need in your IMS. So what is needed? The typical thing. What, why, when, what, and what. A lot of what's in this one here. So one of the things that I think might be surprised is skills and knowledge. So skills and knowledge, it could be an odd requirement, but the skills and knowledge of your audit team impacts the findings and the outcome of the audit significantly. It is always advisable to have the same audit performed more than one time by different auditors. For example, your machine operators are going to find discrepancies that are known or common to them. Your electrician or maintenance mechanic might and most likely will find different things because that's the way that their brain is thinking and that's what their eyes are looking for, what's normal and customary to them. So to get a better, full-rounded audit, it is always recommended that your audit team use the exact same form, the exact same parameters and location, but have different disciplines go out and do the exact same audit to then get a better cross-reference of findings. And of course, always, your audit team should work in harmony. It's not a competition. It's not who can find more. It's just finding what you find. And then the members should be empowered to speak up if they don't know, if they have a question, or if they see something that they feel is unsafe. So what are the advantages of an integrated management system? Obviously, enhanced capability, compliance with regulatory standards, implementing new standards because you already have a system in place, integrating standards into your management system because they're very similar and they fit together nicely, added value for the end user. Anybody within your company or any auditor. If an auditor comes in and you have an IMS where the structure, the format, the process is the same, regardless of what the task is, it makes the audit process much easier. Kind of like why they changed safety data sheets, where now all the safety data sheets are exactly the same. You no longer might find first aid on page 4 or find first aid on page 16. You know exactly where it's going to be. So that consistency, that standardization is really a great value. And then, of course, we'll add a layer of discipline for specific requirements because you're going to have all of these teams coming together and agreeing on what does and doesn't need to be in there. So we're going to look at some of the fundamentals. And they're common, just like any management system: leadership, planning, risk management, implementation, continuous improvement, and sustainability. And then, of course, as we say, IMS is a framework of policies, procedures, and processes that ensure a company plans, operates, and controls its activities to achieve its desired performance objectives. That's what its function is. And the benefits of an IMS are many, absolutely many. Improving performance, eliminating redundancies, accountability, consistency, reducing bureaucracy. And that one there, of course, is a big one, because when you reduce all of that red tape, even internal red tape, things don't get held up over dispute over format or content or how it's going to be decided. When you have a good plan in place and everybody has to follow the same plan, the work or the task gets done much faster and much easier. Some more benefits, obviously, cost reduction. Like we mentioned, it reduces audits, it reduces assessments, it speeds up time. Shared resources, some of the documents may be similar, and you may be able to share them and just tweak them to meet that particular task. Like we mentioned, it reduces compliance checks and audits. It speeds up audits and makes audits so much easier, whether they're internal or external audits. And then, of course, the biggest one is that it drives operational improvements and improves operational efficiency, which means deliveries are on time, cost effective, more revenue to do more things for the company. So some common management system structures. We don't want to be a silo. We don't want to do that because then everybody's doing their own thing. There's no consistency. There's different information. All this stuff is scattered. So the thing about a common management system is that many things can be missed when looking at management systems separately. You're focused on one task and not all tasks required or performed by the organization. You're not giving it a holistic view. Each management system has its own requirements. However, there needs to be a common thread between them, such as when you're collaborating on a writing document, a technical document. At the end, you send it off to the harmonization team so the document has the structure, word choice, definitions, and fonts. This brings it all together as if it had one author versus the 15 or 16 in the working group. As with any business, there will be multiple systems, but it is one company. Fragmented data and decisions hurt bottom lines. Aggregating all product data into a single source establishes teams across the organization to align on and action the most impactful actions. And like we said, when you have separate systems and you don't have an IMS, it does not give a view that the company is holistic, and it does not show a true picture of how the company is functioning as a whole. It's just like with spending. You have departmental budgets, but there's only one bank account. So that's why you have a departmental budget, because you need to have enough money to support the entire company. And that's the same with integrated management systems. It gives a better impression, a better viewing of how the company is functioning as a whole. So we want to look at some frameworks. So this is a common framework, and it's, again, like we say, it's a common framework. It's well published. It's been out there for 100 years. Leadership, risk management, improvement, implementation, and then some elements: commitment, accountability, policies, organizations, stakeholders, and the typical fare. So starting off, because we're going to, the problem with the framework was great and it gave you an outline. However, when you're starting to write a document, it can be very daunting when you're just looking at a white page. Having a starting off point can sometimes just spur your thought process, and that's why so many times when you are doing document writing or creating a program, it really is just brainstorming, throwing words down. You don't even have to throw sentences down. But we did want to give you some tips on where to get started. So here's a list of some buzzwords, some keywords. These are the kind of things that are typically used in documents. And then I wanted to go one step further, and I wanted to actually give you a little bit better of a starting off point if you don't have a good IMS. And the thing about this is that these are suggestion topic statements, and they could aid you in the developing of your own program. As always, it will need to reflect your work and your risks. I wanted to share with you that note in the terms and definitions. So the interesting thing about terms and definitions is that they can be listed by importance or they can be listed alphabetically. It doesn't matter. Either way is correct. For me, I have found most documents that I look at, the terms and definitions and acronyms are alphabetical. And I think that that's just because our eyes are geared for that. We skim through, we see all the H's, we see all the M's. If you've got M's and Z's mixed in together, you may not see them. So I think that our eyes are just geared to look at things alphabetically, but it does not matter. Either way, whatever way you choose to write your document, either by importance or by alphabetical. So I love this little graph, Plan, Do, Check, Act. And Plan, Do, Check, Act is not a new concept. However, it is a vital step with any management system. You always have to go through and make sure, especially the check and the act, make sure that it's doing what you said it's going to do, and if not, take those actions. And with this one here, it just goes to show that consolidation through standardization, it saves time and it increases quality. This is a great visual for the message that we're trying to get out today. And I wanted to give you some charts and slides and graphs that you could use as a guidance tool. So this here is a responsibility matrix. I just went through and chose some job titles. Obviously, you're going to need to put it to titles that fit with your business. And then, again, some kickoff thoughts of what they would do, who the responsibility goes to, and how they're going to take care of it, and the things that they need to do. Identify your risk, do your risk assessment, define your objectives, do your training, do your audit, do your corrective actions, and always, always documentation and record keeping. That's the bottom with everything, and it's not that it's the bottom least important, it's just that that's when you would document, is kind of at the end. So this is just a little bit of a responsibility matrix for folks that would be involved in the development and upkeep of your IMS. Communication. Communication is, like everything in life, it is a key factor. And this holds true with integrated management systems as well. Because the systems interconnect throughout the organization, communication is vital. It's important that communication responsibilities be clearly outlined and their method of delivery. You can't just simply say, oh, I told Bill, oh, I told Mary. That may not go any further than Bill or Mary. It may never get to the people that need to get there. You need to have a confirmation system that it went out and the intended party received it. So you're going to have to identify the person or persons within your organization responsible for those communications. And then depending upon the size of your company, you may use your company org chart. That may be a great place to pick who is responsible for what particular task needs to be done. And then this one here is a list of standards, and this complements and supports the two graphs that we had before, two pinwheels. These are actually the title of the standard, the number of the standard, and a quick little description of what the standard is all about. And as we talked about, ISO has numerous standards, and you can certainly and need to create your own listing based on the work performed. And you need to search for standards that apply to your specific scope of work. Bring together your committee, decide if this is the right standard for your work or not. Then begin to integrate those management systems. And this list is very ISO directed, but don't forget that there are other standards that could apply to your operations, such as ANSI or ASME, and of course, obviously, we can never forget OSHA or MSHA. And like we say, this list is just to open up the view of a variety of different management systems. Like we spoke about, ISO has over 23,000 international standards, which is why they're always referred to so frequently. And again, the thing is that if you are looking to get ISO certified, an IMS can be a great tool and a great benefit as you're going through getting ISO certified for potentially one of these tasks. And of course, keeping graphs, taking and creating a graph as you go from year to year to year or audit to audit to audit to show the progression. When we're looking at that continual improvement, this goes back to the maturity model, established, implemented, maintained, needs improvement, or no components. You can go back and create a graph so that you keep a visual record of it, because sometimes visual records are really helpful, especially for us adult learners. And the thing about these is that these are great to keep as part of your historical document and your review. The other thing is that this is really helpful in doing KPIs. When you're creating your scoreboards and you're creating your KPIs, documentation is a huge part. Not only production and rejects and scrap material and loss or escapes or whatever you call it, but documentation is a huge part of your company as well. So keeping this as part of your KPIs could be a big help as well. And then in closing, like we spoke about, there are so many benefits to an integrated management system. It reduces time and burden, which equals cost and profit. It creates a uniformed management system, which makes it easier for everybody, internal and external, to use. It's consistency within the documents, which lessens confusion. It supports awareness. It identifies risk, and it creates a harmony for the business performance objectives. And that's one of the biggest things that we have to remember. It's one company that should be moving in one direction. So we want to make sure that our business performance objectives are always met. So I'm hoping that you found this presentation useful and that there's things that you will get out of it.
Thank you, Laurie. Really good content. I know you could talk forever on this topic. I could as well. So appreciate that. It is now time for Q&A. We have about 7 minutes for it. Happy to answer any questions. Again, if you have any questions on management systems, please drop them in the chat, and Laurie and I will be happy to answer those for you. But while we're waiting on that, Laurie, I guess just wanted to add in some information. I know you've performed a lot of audits while working for Avetta in your past career. I performed audits prior to Amazon and view a lot of contractors' management systems now. What are some of the common pitfalls you see in the audits or what were some common findings that you see during audits and assessing contractors' management systems?
So in assessing contractors' management systems, it's really the fact that their management system does not accurately align and represent their scope of work. They've either got things in there that they don't do, or we find things that they do, that they haven't said that they did do. So, it's really not actually making sure that their documentation truly supports their scope of work. We were having a conversation earlier about, not with this group, with another group, about the OSHA logs. And, they said, well, what are we doing with the OSHA logs? And I said, well, what I do with the OSHA logs is I look at them and I look at the types of injuries, because if you tell me that you don't do offshore work, but yet you have helicopter training or water rescue training, and one of your guys is hurt doing that, why would you do that if you don't do offshore work? So it's important that everybody is honest about the risks, because not only are their own people at risk, but the people that they're working with, not even working for, but working with, could be at risk also. So honesty is really a big thing. And another thing, as far as not a supplier audit, but an audit in general, one of the things for me is not going through and reviewing and updating it. I am one of those people that if you reference a standard or you reference an article in your document, I'm going to look at it, because, like I said, we expect that your document is your training document. So I want to see what you're training your people to. So you have to take the time to go back and make sure that any reference material that you've put in your documents is still even there and relevant to what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. And similarly to that, what I've found as well is in audits is, if you're going to put it in the procedure and on paper, and actually executing to that standard. So if you say person XYZ is going to perform a certain task prior to starting work, then if it's going to be in your procedure that title or individual performs that task, then you need to be executing upon that. So those are some of the common gaps that I've seen as well on that. And so I know Laurie on the previous breakout talked about purchased procedures and things like that. And while those are fine, and there are a lot of good templates out there that you can purchase, just make sure you are implementing those to how they're written. And then if you don't like it or don't like a certain section of it, you own it at that point. Feel free to update that procedure based on how you perform that task. As long as it's within the bounds of the contractual language and the regulatory requirements.
And exactly, and that was the importance that I had mentioned in the last session, was if you tell me you do it, I'm going to add it to your profile. You have a safety program for it. Why would you have a safety program for work you don't perform? So take that minute, and and like you say, buying a 600-page safety manual doesn't make it a better safety manual. It just makes it a longer one. So, take the time to go through and pull out those things or add in those things that you do, because and again, if you can't take the time to review your safety manual, then how important is safety to you?
Exactly. Yeah, and I know you mentioned the Plan, Do, Check, Act. It's been mentioned a few times today, and it's really important that, for yourselves, Amazon, we do that for our cycle, and then we're looking forward and looking at how we're going to perform audits moving forward to both ourselves and to our contractors. And so it's really important that you perform your own continuous improvement auditing processes, not only for yourselves, but for your suppliers. If you have subcontractors, it is imperative that you're holding them accountable to those same requirements, because at the end of the day, the GCs are the ones that own the contract, and so Amazon will hold you accountable to fulfilling those obligations if something happens to one of your subcontractors.
Yep, Absolutely. And that's where, your, whatever you want to call it, your master service agreement, your bridging agreement, your interface document, whatever you want to call it, you really align and define the work, who's responsible for what, and make sure that that's clearly known. And, you have to abide by that. And like you say, you have to decide whose safe work practices you're using and who's going to be the on-site supervisor. It's really important. And like we had mentioned, if someone gets hurt and they haven't been identified in the work team, like a contractor brings in someone that you don't know about. Well, you don't know that they're there, but ultimately, as the hiring company, you are responsible for them because they're on your property or they're on your job site. So it can be, and again, sometimes contractor management can be 6 tiers down. It can be a very, very huge task, but it's really important.
Well, thank you very much, Laurie. That does conclude our Q&A and our session for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining in today. And this is the last session. We will be sending out links to all the material in the next couple of weeks, so you may view other content you may have missed during that time. Thanks again, and you all have a safe